Known in the industry as the brain behind brands, Leslie Zane has turned the marketing industry on its head. She is changing the way companies do marketing through her unique expertise in applying behavioral science to change instinctive brand behavior. As a brand manager early in her career, Zane saw brand building differently from the rest of the industry and, like many unconventional thinkers, her recommendations were often dismissed. In 1995, she launched Trigger's brand consulting on the premise that instinctive brand behavior is easier to influence than the conscious mind, a concept that was 25 years ahead of its time. A Yale and Harvard Business School graduate and P&G and Bain & Company alumnus, Ms. Zane and her company Triggers have been serving Fortune 100 companies successfully ever since, delivering over $10 billion in incremental revenue. Triggers was also the first brand consulting firm founded by a woman.
This is a Touchstone Publishers presentation, your trusted source of leadership knowledge.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening. I kind of changed. I got enough criticism for saying good morning all the time, so I'll say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, do it all. Glenn Daniels with Touchstone Publishers and our special guest today, TED Talk speaker Leslie Zane. Now, she has opened up some interesting avenues about how our subconscious mind works for success. And inside of her TED Talk, it was absolutely powerful, absolutely good. So as you heard in the introduction, we laid that all out, but let's you and I get after it, get right to work right now. Leslie, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Glenn. This is fun. I haven't done the talk in a long time, so it's fun to remember that whole experience from a few years ago.
Well, speaking of that whole experience, I found it to be very useful, and so have the listeners, for you to spend just a moment or two talking about what that journey was like from the day you decided you wanted to do it to the day you walked up on stage. What was that journey like for you?
It was a very long journey with lots of work. You have to go through about 30 hurdles. You have to present your talk a million different ways, first written and then spoken and then little clips of you. And you have to make your argument. You have to be vetted. It was lots of rehearsals. And then the day of the talk, you can, hear your heart beating because you're really hoping you're not going to forget what you have to say.
Yes.
And I've seen people, of all different, celebrities and athletes and presidents make TED Talks. And I think everybody seems to explain that they go through the same experience. It's definitely humbling.
It is. And I'm always amazed by those folks who say, oh, they came and asked me to do it and I went to go do it. Like, okay, great. I'm great because I know I couldn't prepare that way. I had to be prepared. I do know if I ever do another one, 100% memorized, word for word, hand gestures, everything. How did you feel about the actual structure of your talk? Were you happy with it when it's all said and done? How hard did you have to work to get it in place?
Like I said, I had to work very hard. You keep restructuring the story over and over because you only have it's actually very short. It's like 11 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And you try to find the best way to get the flow of information across in that short amount of time. So we did it over and over a number of different ways and then finally fine-tuned it to kind of come up with the best narrative flow.
Perfect, because that's how it worked. And I love your title, The Hidden Link Between Success and the Subconscious. I don't know why that's so hard for me to kind of figure out. There's a link there because my subconscious mind can run everything. So what's going on? What's causing that link? So I thought that was a very appropriate subject that you came up with. How'd you come up with that subject for the talk?
That's my entire life's work. I've spent my entire 30 years of my career understanding how the unconscious mind works, how we're really on autopilot, making all kinds of decisions, from brand decisions to political parties to presidential candidates. Really every decision in our life, almost every decision. It's estimated that 90 to 95% of our decisions are made on autopilot. And when you realize that, businesses and marketers and people who work on causes, they're really not leveraging the unconscious mind the way that they could be.
In most cases, yeah. Yeah, I know when I heard that and I started thinking about that, I said, I have to strongly disagree with that. But when you start to think about it and start working through it, you realize you're lucky if only 95% of your decisions are on automatic pilot. You said something at the very start that I want to just go ahead and explore a little bit. And when you said success comes down to one fundamental thing, tell us what that is and why.
Well, the one fundamental thing you have to do to succeed is you have to grow whatever it is, your brand, your cause, your business, if you were talking about personal branding, this show, for example, you have to grow it physically in people's minds. So let's talk brands because that's the world that I come from, and I think it relates to everything because everything's a brand. A
Hmm.
presidential candidate is a brand. Political parties are brands. Coke and Pepsi are brands. You're a brand. I'm a brand. We're all brands. And what people don't really understand is that brands have physicality. The only way to be successful is to grow your brand physically in the unconscious mind so that it takes up more physical terrain than, another idea or another person or another podcast or another TV show or another, bottle of soda. So that's really what it's all about. It's growing the physical presence of your brand in the brain. This is sort of like a game of Monopoly. Whoever owns the most physical terrain in the brain wins because then it's the most salient and you buy that thing, you reach for that thing, you listen to that on autopilot over and over
Hmm.
again, just
Hmm.
instinctively. That's what it takes.
So that brings up a question that I had a friend when we were listening to this. She said, no, I wonder about that because if you're building a brand, aren't you, especially if you're a speaker, especially as a speaker, but all products, if you're building a brand and it's kind of personal, aren't you giving away aren't you being less than authentic? You're not really being you, you're building a
Ask me
brand.
that again.
So if I'm building a brand, I'm not really being me, but I'm building a brand. You see that brand is for real. It's almost like a real person. So I got to build that brand, but that maybe prevents me from being an authentic person. So that maybe working from two different personalities, one brand, one personal.
So I guess the way I think about it is that the brands that do the best are the ones that have authenticity. Where, I mean, consumers see through brands all the time that are trying to be something that they're not. And you'll find that, for example, the founding story, the roots of the brand, the nostalgic elements of the brand, those are the parts that consumers connect with the most. So I would argue that it shouldn't be necessary to build your brand by being something different than what you are, but allowing people to see the true you, and the power of who you really are, or what that brand is really all about. That's going to probably have the most power anyway.
Okay, okay. And the reason that kind of comes up is because even when we talked about the presidential elections, by the way, you to start talking about 2016 election, that was brave. I mean, you don't know how that's going to turn out, but that was pretty brave, and that worked out okay. But I wonder if the two candidates in the 2016 election were they both authentic candidates? I mean, was that really who they are, or how they presented themselves? And the consumer, the voters, did not see through either one of them, I don't think.
I mean, I think that's fair. We actually did some work on this topic back then, and we found that both brands, Clinton and Trump, had positive and negative associations, and those negative associations for both candidates, in many cases, came from feeling that they were either inauthentic or fake or out for themselves, those kinds of things. So I think you're right about that. But really, the important point from the TED Talk about the 2016 election was that there were many Republican candidates and there were many Democratic candidates. And
Good.
all of those other players, all of those other candidates, many of them might have very well been better candidates than the two that we ended up with. But those other candidates kind of didn't have a fighting chance because they had these small brand presences in the mind, whereas both Clinton and Trump had, probably 30 years of having built their brands in the public eye. And so they had these very large physical, we call them the brand connectome. I talk about the brand connectome in the
I was
talk.
going to ask about that. Yes.
So the brand connectomes were large. And so in many ways, those two candidates became the de facto candidates, not necessarily because they were great candidates, but simply because they had these gigantic brand connectomes that already existed. And the other candidates didn't have time in a 1.5 to 2 year election campaign season to build their brand connectomes up to the same physical presence, the same physical size. The lesson there for a new candidate coming, out, it's not like you don't have a chance, you do, but you got to start really early. You've got to start years before building your presence in people's minds. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes sense, because when you talk about the brand connection, that's one thing that I noticed you mentioned that I want to ask you about. The new person, the new kid on the block, yes, we may need years, but we don't have years. If we're starting a business, let's say we're starting a online business, e-commerce business, we don't have years to build that brand, connect them up that Amazon has.
Right.
But if we don't do it soon, it doesn't happen. I mean, likely to go out of business, I believe. Do you have a game plan, or do you have a thought on how to build that larger impact?
So I would say that President Obama sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, a lot of people didn't know he had been a senator or didn't know his whole history. So he kind of came on the scene in a very short amount of time and built his brand to be large enough to kind of overtake the rest of the candidates during that election. And the way he did it was he just built a ton of positive associations very quickly. And he also kind of depositioned, the other candidate, which I think was Mitt Romney at the time. So it is possible to do, but you have to be really, really effective at building those positive associations. He also connected himself to popular culture really well. He went on the late night TV shows. He made appearances in a lot of places where pop culture, he connected himself to pop culture very effectively. So he sort of became culturally relevant. And the more touch points you have in people's lives, the more easily that brand connectome is going to spread. The way I think about the brand connectome is it's like you're planting a seed in the mind, and you have to feed that seed soil, water, and sun. So what's the equivalent of that? The equivalent of that in this scenario is positive associations. The more positive associations you feed your little seedling, the more branches that grow and sprout and little by little overtake, all those neural pathways overtake the unconscious mind. And your brand goes from a seedling to a full-grown tree.
Okay, so now I'm kind of tracking really nice with you, because what you're connecting to the positive, and you can better connect to the positive if you're authentic about being there. So maybe the difference is that, like you said, flowering and growing the positive associations.
100%.
Okay. So I'm kind of curious. You said earlier on that this is your life's work. How did you get involved in that? And then a little bit, what drew you to this field? Because I'm sure it's a pretty wide open field with a lot of work in it, though.
Yeah. So this story starts very early on. Before I started my company, I worked in great companies like Johnson & Johnson and Procter & Gamble. And I was definitely odd man out in that I had very different ideas than anybody else in marketing. I was saying that people were making decisions on a really emotional level, and that wasn't showing up in our research. And my favorite story is the story that I tell in my TED Talk, where I was this young, female employee working at a giant baby company. And I had noticed that the sales were not doing well on the baby business. And I also noticed that dads were getting more involved in caregiving. And when moms saw a dad pushing a baby carriage, their heads would turn. So I marched into my boss's office and I said, let's put the first father in a Johnson's baby shampoo commercial. And he said, you're crazy.
Yeah.
And I kept pushing this because I really believed in it. I really felt like we needed to be more relevant and that there was something really emotional about seeing a father instead of a mother, the typical mother, taking care of a newborn baby. And I just kept getting resistance. But I didn't stop because that's that's who
Yes.
I am.
That's who you are.
And
Yes.
I got a terrible performance review that year that I was too obsessed with this idea. Leslie is too passionate about putting fathers in advertising, and this is an executional concern, not a strategic one.
Yes. Yes.
Which was like a knife in my heart. So anyway, to cut to the chase, what ended up happening in that situation was that finally, after like a year of trying, they put the first father in a Johnson's baby shampoo commercial, and sales just started zooming. And it was the highest scoring commercial in the company's history. Sales picked up, and it was just a big success story. But it was definitely unconventional thinking at the time because it wasn't anything that had surfaced in our research.
Right.
So I was trying to explain that there are these things that are happening on an unconscious level that companies and brands aren't tracking, and we need to pay attention to those. But it was hard to get that off the ground inside sort of the corporate structure at that time. So I left and started my own firm in 1995. And my whole premise was that we were going to unlock the key to growth. We were going to unlock the key to brand growth by understanding how these unconscious decisions are made. And that's where the brand Connectome came from. And, the last 26 years at Triggers Brand Consulting, that's the name of my company that I founded. That's what we've been working on. And we really have cracked the code on growth. We can help companies switch competitive users to our brands at an accelerated rate. And it all has to do with understanding how to build brands in the unconscious mind.
Okay, so when you said understanding how to build brands, there was really no empirical data on you making that switch to say, okay, put a man taking care of a baby in the ad, because it was up to that point. It sounded like the only thing you did was notice what was going on around you. I assume now that because of that switch, especially with your company, that you have empirical data that says, okay, this might work better because it's speaking to the subconscious mind.
That's such an excellent point. What brought me to that original epiphany was my own instincts, was my own gut. And I didn't have the proof at that time, which was why it was so difficult. I mean, I was really viewed as this very unconventional thinker. And, unconventional thinkers, whether it's, Einstein or I don't even know who had these viewpoints that are very different. Very often they're laughed out of a room, but, years later, the science comes out that backs it up. So it was probably 15 years later that Daniel Kahneman did his System 1, System 2 book, and neuroscience information came out, and behavioral science became more popularized. And so I was able to take a whole body of that scientific research and now explain why I was getting the results that I am. So that's really how it happened. Our work preceded. We were already practitioners, and it was working as we were working for big brands like Snickers and Pepsi from the very beginning. But the science and the research came as we went forward, and it enabled us to back up everything that we do now with reams of data and what we call instinctive behavioral data that shows exactly what the drivers and barriers of the brand are at an unconscious level.
Okay. Now tell us again, because the book that is by Daniel. Can you tell us again that book
Daniel
that?
Kahneman, he's like considered the godfather of behavioral science.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I think it came out in 2011, if I'm correct. So that was like, what is that? That's like 15 years later than we started my company. Then I started my company. And he talks about system one is the unconscious mind, system two is the conscious mind. And he shows how people make a lot of irrational decisions. Um, and it explains how all that works. What we were doing was really practicing that theory 15 years earlier, but we didn't know that that's what what it was
Right.
called.
What it's
Behavioral
going to be called, yeah, in somebody else's book.
science.
Okay. Okay. You also talked in your TED Talk, and I want to ask you about this a little bit. You mentioned the fact that there's ways to grow your brand. You made a discovery about that. What is the way to grow your brand?
Well, the way to grow your brand is to add a lot of positive associations very quickly to your brand. And if you can, um, imply that the competition doesn't have those same things.
Mm,
In a sense, you're not really giving them the competitive brand negative associations, and you don't need to call them out by name. But one of the brands that I talk about that did this really well, a small brand that came out of nowhere and came on the scene and grew very, very rapidly, is Dollar Shave Club. I write
yeah.
about that in Knowledge at Wharton in my
Yes.
article, Cracking the Code on Brand Growth, which I collaborated on with a professor of neuroscience, actually, Michael Platt, from University of Pennsylvania, Wharton. And what we talk about is how Dollar Shave Club was able to amass a ton of positive associations very quickly and take down a giant brand like Gillette. I
Yeah.
mean, not take it down, but make tremendous inroads in that brand overnight.
Yes.
And they purely did that by adding a lot of positive associations to Dollar Shave Club and a lot of negative associations to Gillette. But he never called Gillette out by name, but everybody kind of knew that's who they were talking about. So that's a kind of you asked for like a recipe for how to make a small brand be able to accelerate its growth really fast. That article will help people.
Yeah, it did. And by the way, I read that article, and yeah, I loved it. It opened up some thinking for me, which brings me to my next question for you. So I noticed, Dollar Shave Club versus Gillette, but I've always kind of wondered, why didn't Burger King outpace McDonald's? Why didn't Wendy's outpace McDonald's? They were really subconsciously able to pull out what's wrong with McDonald's. McDonald's is prepared. Pre-prepared for you. It's ready for you. It's a hamburger. There's nothing else, nothing different about it. So they were able to kind of say what was wrong with it, but why didn't they overtake McDonald's and really become the number one chain?
That's a really great question. I would say that probably is a combination of business moves as well, operational moves, as well as growing the brand. In the mind, look, those brands, Burger King, Wendy's, have made inroads in McDonald's. They've made tremendous share inroads, but McDonald's remained preeminent because it's got this amazingly strong franchise system. It has
Okay.
more locations around the globe. It's done a good job of customizing its menu from region to region, country to country. And at a time when they were criticized for not having the freshest food, a lot of that was fabricated. A lot of that really wasn't true. It was, videos that had gone viral that were really saying very negative things about the ingredients in the food that weren't true. And once they started explaining how they actually make the food with real
Hmm.
fresh ingredients, then that began to turn around.
So the attack that the other companies and other people placed on McDonald's, because it wasn't true, it wasn't authentic, it didn't ring for a while. It just stayed in place for a short period of time. And so McDonald's was maybe able to fight back by saying, okay, yeah, we have fresh food.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they should have been telling that story all along. And that's like another sort of lesson in branding is that you think people know the great things that you're doing, but unless you constantly reinforce it for every new generation of consumers that comes along, you lose it. It's like use it or lose it. And we actually have a formula for how we talk about how brands need to stay fresh and stay
Mm.
relevant and keep evolving. And that's keep, stop, reinforce. Keep keep providing and reinforcing the positive associations you have. And so examples of that would be like McDonald's telling its story about its great ingredients and how it has everything comes straight from the farm, all that good information. Then they needed to stop any negative associations that they were providing. And this is true. This is a formula for every brand. I'm just using McDonald's as an example. So keep, stop, and then add the positive associations that your growth target needs, the people you don't have, the competitive users or the lapsed users who have left. Keep giving them add new positive associations that they need to come over. So keep, stop, add. And that's how a brand stays fresh. A brand can't stay still. You can't say the same thing today that you said 20 years ago. I mean, you can maybe some of it, but you have to keep evolving as new cultural movements come along, as people change and evolve and become more health oriented, more wellness oriented, more fresh food oriented, more against artificial flavors and colors and preservatives. You know, the world changes. It doesn't stay the same. And you can really miss the boat and get left behind if you're not constantly evolving your story, those positive associations.
Yeah. So like what you did, said, okay, well, we need to evolve and put a man in our ad for babies.
Exactly.
So we have to grow like that, There's, when it comes to this subconscious issue, there's always been a debate between cost and convenience. Now, the Dollar Shave Club, they were at cost. I mean, yes, it's more convenient to go to the grocery store and pick up a razor from Gillette. So it wasn't very convenient, but they oftentimes there's that battle between cost and convenience. Is that when you're talking about subconscious? Is that one of those areas you're talking about? I mean,
so we recommend to our clients that they not spend a lot of time talking about cost, because keeping on lowering your price is a race to the bottom, and we want our clients to be as profitable as possible.
mm-hmm.
And if you really look at the Dollar Shave Club advertising at the time that it, sort of came onto the scene and became big, it cost was part of the story, but it wasn't the whole story. That they really talked about the quality of the
Yes.
razor.
Yes.
And so I would argue that they had a ton of positive associations on a lot of different dimensions that were the key to really unseating those larger razor companies. Quality, cost, convenience, being on this, direct to consumer, not having to go to the supermarket. A lot of the razors were behind glass or behind almost like a safe. You had to call somebody to come get it. That's not very convenient.
Yeah.
So they had three things going for them, and they promoted them: quality, cost, and convenience. And I think that three-legged stool really helped them make a lot of share inroads in the bigger players.
Okay. And that tracks with you. I want to ask you about this as well. You talked about there's a subconscious advantage. And it's like you almost just kind of laid it out when you said they talked about all three of these areas: quality, cost, and convenience. What is a subconscious advantage? Can you explain that to us a little bit? And how do you get it?
I love that question. All right, so let me take a step back and say, here's the ironic thing. There are a lot of brands and products out there that are parody. They're no better than the next guy's brand, right? It's just a parody brand, but they have perceived superiority. The perception is that they're superior because of the associations that are connected to the brand. And similarly, there are a lot of brands and products that are actually superior, but they don't get the credit for being superior because they're not connected to the right things. They don't have the right brand associations.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, what matters, the only thing that matters in the world of consumers and marketplaces and brands is perception. And you can gain what I call the subconscious advantage or the instinctive advantage by making sure that you are tapping into all those positive associations in the unconscious mind. In fact, a brand that doesn't have a lot of resources, I'm sure a lot of your listeners today don't work for big companies.
Right.
And maybe they're starting a small business. Maybe they're trying to build a personal brand. Maybe they're trying to build a podcast. Those brands can gain a subconscious advantage or an instinctive advantage without a lot of resources, just like Dollar Shave Club did, by having all the right positive associations and adding them very rapidly to your brand and connecting to all the positive things in people's lives. That's what's going to make your brand grow its physical presence in the unconscious mind faster. And that's what I call the having the subconscious or the instinctive advantage. It's a twist on competitive advantage. Like at Harvard Business School, where I got my MBA, they taught us about the competitive advantage. Professor Michael Porter taught a whole course on that. How do you gain the competitive advantage? But the way that was taught back then wasn't a very straightforward matter. Like you either have a cost advantage or you have a differentiation advantage. Well, what I'm saying is those things are fine, but unless you have a perceptual advantage, unless you own more space in the unconscious mind, more presence in the unconscious mind, those other things may not even matter.
Okay.
It's a new kind of competitive advantage. I'm saying subconscious advantage, instinctive advantage is almost more powerful than the original competitive advantage.
I think I would just agree with you. That subconscious, since that's the one that we can break through, that is really more powerful. Is this some of the stuff talked about in your growth triggers playbook? Do you talk about that? What does that do? Does it relate to the subconscious advantages or things like that? Tell us about that.
So if you think about the world of marketing, which I've been in my entire life, we were raised on a particular set of rules. An example would be, that uniqueness is critical. You have to be unique. That's what's most important. So be the purple cow, differentiate or die, stand out. And that's just one example. There are many others. There are these classic rules that all marketers follow, that we're trained on, that we're taught either in business school or college or in classes. And the truth is that whole playbook of rules was created back in the days of Mad Men, really, before we had brain science, before we had neuroscience, before we had behavioral science. And now we have all this brain science, but we didn't go back and rewrite the rules. We're still following these old rules. And the old rules, what they say is you can persuade somebody. You can tell somebody, you can basically make somebody buy your brand by consciously persuading them, persuading the conscious mind. But the problem is that the conscious mind is very resistant to change. It says, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to sell me, and I'm not going to do what you're telling me to do. And so what we really need is a new set of rules that explains and that's shaped to leverage the unconscious mind. And that's what the Growth Triggers Playbook is. I put that together for audiences like yours so that people could have access to the new rules that our company teaches, Fortune 500 clients, because I want them to have those same advantages. And so that there are 5 of those rules in the playbook that you're showing right here that I think will be really useful to people, because they're rules that recognize that we need to leverage, piggyback on the unconscious mind rather than fight the conscious mind. you can't really persuade anybody of anything. You know that from
Oh wow,
trying
yeah,
to,
yeah,
right? You
yeah,
can't.
yeah.
You can. I could stay here all day, and if you and I are on, opposite pages on a particular issue, I'm never going to convince you, and you're never going to convince me. And so going up against the conscious mind, I think of that as the path of greatest resistance to
Hmm.
a sale. Whereas going through the unconscious mind is the path of least resistance to a sale. And those 5 rules in the playbook, the new rules of marketing, are going to help people leverage the unconscious mind to accelerate their growth, company growth or brand growth faster.
Okay, I'm going to leave the link up there so everybody can get that and copy it down, and it'll be in the show notes as well. But I understand that there are no rules in marketing. And I don't want you to go into long detail about it because I want people to go get the playbook. But can you maybe just give us like the titles of each one of those 5 rules?
I'm not sure I could rattle them off right
Okay.
here either, but let me just do one because I think that's going to be the one that I started explaining. I didn't tell you the new rule. So the old rule was that it's all about being unique. Like if you're coming into a category and you're a tomato sauce, you need to put your sauce in a can that's a completely different color so that it
You can.
stands out different from everybody else's.
Okay. Okay.
And what we know about that is that it doesn't work. Why? Because the brain is hardwired to connect with the familiar, not with the unique. You know this from babies. Take a newborn baby, or let's not do a newborn. Let's take a baby,
Okay.
6-month-old. If you take a baby out of its mother's arms and you give that baby to a stranger, that baby is going to scream its head off. Why? Because it knows its mother. We're hardwired to connect with the familiar, not with the unique. That's why people are on autopilot in the stores buying the same brands over and over and over again. There isn't a lot
Hmm.
of shopping for the new. It's mainly you're just going to your go-to choices and buying them over and over and over again. So the truth is that uniqueness, that shouldn't be number one. Actually, now that you think about it, you begin to realize that familiarity is more important than uniqueness, and distinctiveness is best of all. What is distinctiveness? Distinctiveness is the new version of uniqueness. What I'm saying is that you want to leverage familiar things in people's minds and render your brand in a distinctive way that leverages those familiar pathways.
Okay. That just clicked. Okay. Yeah.
Does
I
that
hope
make
that clicks.
sense?
Yeah. I hope that clicks for everybody because that makes great sense. Here's what is familiar. Then on the same hand, almost to say, here's what's distinct. We're familiar, but here's what's distinctly different about us.
Correct. I mean, a great example of this, and I use this example all the time because it's such a great evidence of this this approach. If you look at the Aquafina bottled water, which is a hugely successful bottled water, it has a snow-capped mountain on its package.
Sure.
And you could look at that and you could say, well, snow-capped mountain, everybody has a snow-capped mountain on their bottle. That's not unique. So let's take the snow-capped mountain off the bottle. And there's some folks that argued that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the problem is that snow-capped mountain is incredibly powerful. We all know what that is. It's familiar to us. Not only is it familiar, it's incredibly powerful in the bottled water category. It means pure, pristine, eco-friendly, natural,
Hmm.
cold, refreshing, glacier, water from the glaciers. It's all
Okay.
these amazing things. Why would you want to throw that away? Well, you don't need to if you render that snow-capped mountain in a distinctive way. And that's what they did. They created this very abstract, wonderful design with a little orange sunset, and they made that snow-capped mountain something ownable to Aquafina so that it's distinctive, but it's leveraging those familiar snow-capped mountain pathways that are so meaningful and important to us in terms of purity in the bottled water category. that's what I mean by
Okay.
distinctiveness is the new unique.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful example. That's perfect. That's perfect. That now makes me want to go back and change a couple things, but that's perfect. That's perfect. So, and I'll be honest with you, I never really went out to hire a graphic artist because I said, oh, I can copy somebody else's. But that's the power of getting a good graphic artist, right? Because they can make that design distinctive.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, there goes somebody just got a graphic artist contract there. So that's going to be unique for them. I want to ask you about, sometimes TED Talks makes a difference in career trajectory. Did it for you? Did it change the way did you start getting more business, or did it change the way you viewed things when you did it, after you did it?
That's a really good question. I think for me, doing the TED Talk was more just like a personal accomplishment
Okay.
that I wanted to, achieve. I don't even know how many people have seen it, but I would say that it was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to get my ideas out there, and it felt good when it was over.
Okay. You and I are 100% agreement. When it's over with, it's time to walk off. Okay. So, yeah, it's felt good when it's all done with.
No, but
Tell
I'm
me.
really glad. I'm really glad I did it. I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah, and I'm glad I get the chance to speak with people who did it also. I learned a lot about
Yeah,
it.
and I also think it's an amazing organization, Ted, and I think that they're really filling a particular need in the marketplace to bring new innovative ideas to a really big, broad audience. And I love the diversity that they have, and the fact that they include people from all walks of life, and kind of give everybody a chance. You don't really need to be famous to have a TED Talk, or be a celebrity. And I think that's very powerful that great ideas can come from anywhere. So,
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah,
But I have to admit that, after I listened to your TED Talk last night and again this morning, it was kind of by mistake this morning. I listened to them. So, but I just listened to it again this morning, and then after yours went, the next one came up, the next one came up, the next one came up. And I have to admit, out of every one of those, even though a couple of them had nothing in the world to do with what I was interested in, you got a nugget of wisdom
there
out
is.
of every
There's
single one.
always a little nugget,
Yeah,
something you can learn from. So
yeah, and
no,
it's
I
always
totally
powerful.
agree.
I think it's always powerful. So now you've mentioned this already, but I really want you to go ahead and just give it to us. What are you doing right now to help people?
So I would say that the initiative, involved in two initiatives that I'm excited about. One is, beyond my regular work. I would say, first of all, I try to cultivate my people and develop, everybody who works at Triggers. That's really important to me, and to help our clients as well, to be the best that they can be and achieve their personal and professional goals. But beyond that, I'm a member of the boards of two really important organizations. One is called Curate 360, led
Mm,
by Jessica Thomas. She has created an organization that's helping emerging minority owned and female owned brands become retail ready. Very often, minority owned and female owned businesses have amazing ideas, but they don't know how to operationalize them. They don't know how to manage a supply chain. They don't know how to do inventory control. They don't have maybe a CEO mindset. So they just haven't had the kind of training that they need to be truly successful and get into, a Target, a Whole Foods, a CVS. And so Jessica's company is doing that. She's working directly with the founders, and I'm the branding expert for that organization, helping those people basically learn some of the same secrets that we've been giving to Fortune 500 brands for 26 years. We're sharing them now with them. So that's one that I'm really excited about, and I think it has huge potential, because we want to put more wealth in minority hands, and that's really the goal of that organization. The second, it's a company, not an
yes.
organization. And then the second one is I am a board member of organization, a nonprofit organization called El Centro Hispano,
Mm,
which is located here in Westchester. It basically it helps newly arrived Hispanic immigrants from the whole tri-state area to learn English as a second language. They give tutoring to students. They'll help go with you to speak with teachers, to advocate for a student. They teach computer skills. And the people who sort of graduate from El Centro Hispano basically tell them that it's really helped change their lives for the better. It's sort of like having a mentor to help you succeed here in the United States, coming from all these different, particularly Latin American countries, where they kind of don't know the rules of the game. So they're like giving them the tools to succeed, here and improve the quality of life of their families.
Education, education, education. Both of those projects, both of those organizations and companies speak toward the education deficit that is taking place that we have to erase. But I won't get on my high horse about that because I can get going. So we'll let that one go for a minute. We'll save that for a little bit.
Love that. Agree.
It's pure education. I want to ask you, this is my hard question. I didn't prep you for. In fact, I don't think we prepped at all for this conversation. But I want to ask you a question that's a little bit difficult. And I'm not going to let you off the hook, though. What questions should I have asked you that I did not ask you? What questions should I have asked you that I did not ask you?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I feel like you've asked a lot of questions. I mean, the only one I could think of is, is there something in my childhood that sort of put me on this path, that gave me the confidence to start my own company, to do a TED Talk. Those things take, some nerve and some gumption. And the answer to that question would be that from when I was a little girl, my parents just told me that I could do anything and be anything. They never, suggested that there were any limitations from being a girl or any other limitation. They didn't focus on getting married. They my finding a spouse. They focused on my education, and really, I think just made me feel like I could do anything from a little, being a little girl.
That is a good question. That is one on my list I didn't get to. But there's a second part of that question. What got you into the neuroscience of marketing?
That was really I would say that epiphany moment when I was at the baby company, where I was just seeing these things that were happening at an unconscious level, and realizing that our traditional research approaches were not capturing the true motivations, the hidden motivations. And those hidden motivations are really the ones that are the most important, because that's what drives businesses.
Okay. Love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you very much for your time. I just was one of those educational ones that we could probably do another part on. But I'm going to highly suggest, let me just get it back up here one more time for everybody, to go ahead and get this playbook. I think those 5 rules will help really flip some things around, help make you think a little bit more about how everything goes for it. Leslie, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Glenn. Thanks so much for having me on. This was a fantastic conversation. You're a great interviewer. It was really fun talking to you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for connecting with us here at Touchstone Publishers. Please join our group Essential Leadership Skills and share your leadership knowledge with us all.